Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and I am so excited to be celebrating 10 years of meaningful conversations with you. As we step into our new primetime hour, it's such an honor to share this exciting new chapter with you. So whether you're starting your day out, headed to work, or listening from wherever you are, this hour is designed to bring you thoughtful dialogue, fresh insight, and inspiring stories so you can make every moment count. So thank you for being here with me today, and let's dive in. We're here today with special guest, Tricia Baxley, who's here to share with us her new book, The Stories We Tell Ourselves, the soul journey to uncovering the hidden scripts that define us. So what if the stories you've been believing and telling yourself isn't really true, and rewriting it could change everything? Would you be interested in learning how to do that? I know I would. Well, today's guest is here to share with us how to do just that. Tricia Baxley is a certified MBTI practitioner and a certified life coach, empowering others to overcome obstacles and embrace their full potential. She's a proud member of the International Coaching Alliance, dedicating her life to helping others heal and achieve lasting transformation. So welcome to the show, Tricia Baxley.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Well, Tricia, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. What was the catalyst for writing this book?
Well, actually, a trauma happened in my life 10 years ago. My husband took his life. And in the process of trying to make sense of a life that I had with him for 21 years, I realized that most of the things that I was telling myself, the stories, the way I was living, who I thought I was, really wasn't actually authentic. It was more of a performance. And it was a shock. I could never have believed that I wasn't living authentically. But once you have such a profound loss, you have these defenses stripped away, like literally instantly. And you realize, my goodness, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how I got to where I am. And that really kind of started my journey.
Well, I'm so sorry for your loss. And it's one of the things I found over the course of the years of just talking with people, a lot of folks don't realize the trauma that's left behind for the families, the friends, everybody who knows somebody who commits suicide. I mean, how did you navigate that?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, the trauma. I mean, statistically, 185 people are immediately impacted by someone taking their life. I had two children, 11-year-old and 19-year-old. So as you can imagine, I mean, that was my first and foremost concern. How am I going to make them whole? How am I going to get them back to who they were before this? And the reality is you don't. I mean, that was probably one of the hardest things to accept for myself, is that we don't go back to who we were. In fact, we have to create a new version of ourselves. And, the process of creating that new version, in my case, required me to go backwards. And oftentimes with grief, we think the grief is just about the thing that just happened. But most of us, or many of us at least, have much unprocessed grief from years gone by, often from childhood. And that grief comes to the surface. So for me, I had to go really far back and really take a close look at my life and the people around me and how I got to where I was. But as you mentioned, it impacts everybody. Relationships that I had left, they couldn't handle the stress of the situation. I, retained some people, but a lot of new people came into my life who were able to handle the trauma of being with somebody that was processing suicide. But the suicide itself wasn't actually the most devastating thing. What really was the most devastating thing was really understanding that I can't go back to who I was anymore. And, the analogy I use, it's like being shot out of a cannon and all your pieces are flying around in the universe. And you're literally trying to put yourself back together again. And you realize you can't. It's impossible. It's like Humpty Dumpty. You really cannot put yourself back together the way you were. So you have to take a step back and say, okay, now what do I do? And it's been 10 years of really trying to understand how this impacts other people. And I don't think my story is unique. Sure, I had a suicide in my life, but I don't think it's really about that. I think we all have trauma, and I think grief is grief. I don't quantify grief. Losing a husband to suicide, losing a job, kids leave the house, empty nester syndrome. I mean, we all have losses, and these losses really make us come face to face with who we are. And it's at that moment we have a choice. My choice was very dramatic, but the reality is we all have a choice in taking a step back and saying, is this who I really am? So that's really what the book is about. The stories we tell ourselves is really about the narratives that unconscious narratives that live inside of us. These are like stories that we formed in childhood and, from trauma, and the survival that once protected us, we find out is really just quietly running our lives.
Well, I am so sorry for your loss. I know that must have been so traumatic. And for those people out there that need help, you can always reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. All you have to dial is 988. Well, you start off chapter 1 with a quote that I'm going to share here. It's not the actual trauma and events from childhood that cause the most damage. It's the unconscious beliefs about ourselves, often formed in childhood, from the trauma that we have the greatest negative impact. Can you share on that for us?
Absolutely. So, yeah, one of the things I discovered was, one of the things that happened to me really young was when I was almost 7 years old. My brothers and I were walking home from school, and I walked in on my mom trying to take her life. That was devastating. And when I look back through my years, that was what I was really focused on, was the event that happened. And through the course of the last 10 years, I realized the event really wasn't the trauma. It was the story about the event that was the trauma. And what was my story? My story was I had no one had my back. The other story was I had to protect my mother, because if I didn't protect her, she might take her life and she won't be here anymore. But at the core of all of that, and this is the thing that really was shocking to me, because, I've always been highly ambitious, very self-confident, always able to accomplish any goal that I had. But at the core of all of that, I really felt worthless. And that is the actual story I carried with me my entire life. Running the narrative behind me, choosing my careers, choosing my partners, choosing the things that I thought I loved passionately. So for me, when I look back, the trauma wasn't the problem. It was truly the stories I created around the trauma.
So, how did you uncover these core beliefs and these stories?
Well, I had the luxury of having my defenses stripped away literally overnight. And so the first night, 1 a.m, get a call, get a knock on the door, 4 policemen there telling me, my husband had taken his life. And those first 24 hours, the defenses that I had lived with, that I had no idea I was living with, were literally stripped away. I was like raw. My skin wasn't on my body anymore. I felt exceptionally exposed. But what I also felt was authentic. I didn't know who I exactly was at that point, but I felt authentic. And the people that were coming in and out of my home, I was blessed with many, many wonderful people in my life, giving me condolences. And, at the worst possible moment in my life, I had never felt more connected than I had felt that night. I mean, I just felt so connected to everyone, to humanity, and quite honestly, to myself. And this night in general was just a night of miracles. My kids had grown up in a church, and the youth group came over to add some support. And I remember I was looking into the kitchen from the dining room, which was dark, and just crying, because I'm like, how am I going to get these kids whole again? And I remember someone telling a joke, and everyone was cracking up, including my 2 kids. And I knew then that they were going to be okay. It was going to be a battle and a journey, and we were all going to have to really work hard, but I knew we were going to be okay. But the most important thing that happened to me that night was I heard a voice in my head, and it said, "You are never going back to the way things were." And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I knew it was true. And from that point on, I worked to uncover all the stories. And the truth is, when we look back on our lives, everything, from the point that we are today seems random. Well, this happened and that happened and this happened. And, it creates a whole, linear path that we call our lives and our past. But when we really take a step back, and that's what the workbook helps people do, when we really take a step back and we see our past from the vantage point of seeing the connections, it's really not that difficult. We can easily see why one thing led to the other. And usually, those things leading from one to the other, to the other, to the other, we start seeing our patterns. And it's the reason, that it became rather clear to me what I needed to work on and what I needed to change within myself. And at the end of the day, I don't believe any of us were broken. I think we're all whole. I think what we have in front of us are what I call wet blankets. Those wet blankets are those heavy defenses that we put in place to help us survive. And once we peel away those, wet blankets, we take those, defenses away. What's left underneath is the beautiful, authentic part of ourselves that never wasn't there in the first place.
So, in your book, you talk about the good or the perfect child as a survival strategy. How
Yes.
did that role affect your identity as you got older?
Yeah. So, from the age of 7, I was very conscious of making sure I did everything I needed to do to keep my mother happy and hopefully alive. I took it upon myself. I believed I was somebody that could actually help her. At 7 years old, your only goal is to feel safe, and that was my way of feeling safe. And so what that translated into for me was to be successful at everything that I did. I was an awesome student. I ran in high school and college, and I was this amazing runner. Um, but I was propelled by the desire to be the best I could be because nothing inside of me felt safe. I was finding safety outside of myself. And that was one of the ways I did it. And that carried into my entire life. I mean, that created a sense of discipline. It created a sense of I can achieve everything and anything if I put my mind to it. I still believe that. I believe that for all of us, actually. But it created a sense that there was never enough. Like I could never just have a goal and be settled with that goal. I had to create another goal. And typically there were goals upon goals upon goals. But what I was finding as I was trying to heal from, the last 10 years of my husband's death was that most of the time those goals really had nothing to do with who I was, really had nothing to do with what excited me, what my passions were, who I was authentically. It was really just reaching for something to feel safe. And once I saw that, things changed drastically. But from childhood on, there was no possibility of losing at anything. That was not something that was acceptable to me.
One of the themes you talk about in your book is codependency, and I
Mm.
really appreciate how you do a deep dive into that. So, how can someone begin to realize that they're in codependent patterns in their own behavior?
Well, so first of all, when we start stepping into fixing, that's the first step. And we know when we're doing that. I mean, it's a very a conscious thing. And fixing is the number one evidence of a codependent relationship. We believe that we are there to fix somebody else. Okay. That, if we could do this, this person will be better. They'll be happier. They'll be safer. I'll be safer. So that is the number one thing. I mean, I see it. It's something that I had to really learn and change that behavior because I was also doing it with my kids. If I was doing it with my husband, I was doing it with my kids. So fixing is the number one thing. You have to be conscious of the fact that, you know, there are almost 8 billion people on this planet. We are all on our own journey. We have no business trying to fix somebody else. And it's not our job. It's not our right. There's a degree of arrogance in it. I see that in myself, thinking I know better for what's for somebody, what's better for somebody else. That's just plain silly. So the first thing is that the second thing is recognizing that you care more about meeting someone else's needs than your own. And, I was notorious for that. I mean, I was convinced that I had no needs, that everything was self-contained, that I never asked for anything. The first time I actually asked for help was after my husband had died, and I had to drop my son off at 7:30 in the morning at a friend's so she could bring him to school. I had the first therapy appointment. And I remember being absolutely overwhelmed by asking for help. It was something I had never done before. I just always took care of it myself. So it's behavior like that. But when you start needing to feel needed, when you start needing to help somebody else over helping yourself, oftentimes hurting yourself, when you have this need to fix somebody else, those behaviors all center on one thing, and that is always trying to do something outside of ourselves versus looking at ourselves first. And self care is critical. I mean, we have to take care of ourselves first. And codependency is not about that. It's the exact opposite. It's about taking care of everybody else first. And the reason we do it is because that's the way for us to feel safe. If we take care of everyone else, if we are needed enough, they won't leave us. And so those are the best way for people who are trying to identify if they have a codependent relationship is where's their attention directed? And how deeply is it directed? And am I sacrificing parts of myself to make something work or to sustain a relationship that maybe isn't in my highest and best good?
It seems like so many people, I mean, even I've gone through points where it's like, oh, I want to help people and in many ways fix them. It could be friends, you
Mm-hmm.
name it. And it's interesting when you step back and look at that, just what that in some ways really means to us.
Yes, I mean exactly. Now, in my case, speaking for myself, I had some significant needs to feel safe. My whole life as an adult was actually probably even more so in childhood, but definitely defined as an adult was a methods and ways to create safety in my own life. And I built an infrastructure. My whole life was centered around feeling safe, but the safety was external. And so when I'm trying to fix somebody else, when I'm trying to feel, to feel needed, this is all about us. It's all about the lack inside of us. We want to believe, and this was really, really difficult for me to accept about myself. We want to believe that when we're helping others, we're always doing it for the right reasons. And the right reasons are altruistic, right? We just want to help somebody else. But oftentimes we find out, and myself included, we're doing it for ourselves. We just don't realize it. And so, I have always been service minded. I will always be service minded. I will always help people. But from this point, I help people in a very, very different way. I really am conscious of why I am helping somebody. And, at this point, I've grown enough that I'm never really ever in jeopardy of helping somebody to get something back. But I see very, very vividly how I was doing that in the past. And, it's okay. We grow, we learn, we do better. But the reasons why we don't want to do that is because it's harming on us on some level. And it's really pointing back at us saying, all right, what is it inside of you that's lacking that you need someone to need you? And at the end of the day, what I've discovered is, we are safe. We are whole. We don't have to go outside ourselves to get those fundamental needs met. We have them inside of us. The only problem is we can't access those feelings of safety and wholeness without reaching our authenticity. When we're totally defended against it all, in every single way possible, it forces us to have to look outside ourselves to get those needs met. And the minute we start doing that, we're in a deficit automatically.
In your book, you talk about inherited stories versus lived stories. How do those two differ, and how can someone begin to separate those?
Yeah. So inherited stories are, stories that, ancestral. So in my family, as an example, um, going back as far as I can, see, the women in the family, all were the ones who did everything. We always found partners who were relatively passive. We always, had our needs um, met outside of ourselves, always looking to have those needs met externally. We all sacrificed our authentic self to keep relationships going. Those were learned behaviors. All right. So when I talk about ancestral, trauma and that kind of thing. They're all learned behaviors. Our parents are our models. So when you grow up in a family, and it's why alcoholic families often breed alcoholics. It's a behavior as much as it is a disease. And the thing is when we have family members who are behaving in a certain way, reacting to their situations, emotionally in a way that creates dependencies and attachments that aren't healthy, we start modeling our behavior after that. And then the trauma that happens to us alone. I mean, trauma in childhood isn't just family trauma. We have trauma from our peers, from our churches, from our schools, from our sporting teams. I mean, all these things are factoring into creating a database on who we are as a person. And, depending on what happens, that database we could be conscious of it, or we could be highly unconscious of it. And it's that unconscious part of ourselves that really runs the show. It's hard to imagine, but most of why we do the things we do, until we awaken and we understand the patterns that are dictating every choice we make, we're just kind of being, a puppet, being forced to do things that we're not even aware of why we're doing them.
So, to kind of dovetail with that, do many of our beliefs are those true or learned?
They're both. Um, every single thing when we're growing up, especially, we're being bombarded with different, information all the time. And this information is being processed within us. Is this true for me? Is it not true for me? And so on the conscious level, we're creating those stories and we're aware of what is going on. But on a subconscious level, the stories, we would be shocked to know how we feel about ourselves. It's sort of like my discipline, as an example. I'm tremendously disciplined. Um, it's a wonderful quality to have. But how I got that quality, not so good. And it can impact. I mean, I have to be very careful about it, because I will be very firm in not deviating from those things that I feel I need to do. So the stories are created in that manner, and they are learned because society is part of what's teaching us as we're growing up, but they're also created from our own belief system, internal belief system. So it's really working hand in hand.
In your book, you talk about how forgiveness really played an important role in your journey. What did forgiveness look like in your practice?
Okay, so forgiveness, most of us, or many of us, think of forgiveness as moral. I think of it more as neurological. And the reason I say that is it when we have something that happens to us, whether, we feel someone has wronged us, or we feel, we've had a traumatic event and someone, it is involved and we just can't forgive them. It creates a block in our nervous system. And when we are having that type of block, we stay braced against the past. It's always there, that tension. And until you release it, many times you don't even realize you had that tension. So forgiveness is not about excusing. It's about releasing the cost of holding on to it. And it's really about yourself. I mean, we've all heard that, this forgiveness is about yourself. And the reason why it is about ourselves is because we're releasing the hold that it has on us. And it is a system hold. It's, now with medical research, most of us have heard, that stress plays a role in certain cancers and certain diseases. And I'm a definite believer in that, because I lived in such high intensity my entire life. It wasn't until I didn't have that intensity anymore that I realized how incredibly blocked I was, and how I was really braced all the time, almost like as if I was waiting for something bad to happen. And that cortisol runs through you and you just get used to it, and you don't even realize that it is absolutely dictating your energy, how you show up every day, how you react to things. So for me, forgiveness is on that level. Um, it's also about seeing forgiveness as an energy. Okay, so I always forgave my family growing up. It was one of the things I've done since I was a little girl. I always recognized at a very young age that they actually were doing the best they could. It fell far short from what I needed, but I recognized it wasn't technically malicious. I mean, of course they had choice, but I really felt that they were doing the best they could. Um, but the forgiveness was coming from an intellectual place. It was not coming from a heart place. And it wasn't until I started healing myself that I recognized the difference. And when it's coming from your head and you see forgiveness from an intellectual perspective, you're not really releasing anything. You're seeing it from a moral perspective. I forgive you because you did the best you could. When you release it from your heart, it is a true release. You feel it leave your body. Anything that happened is no longer there. And so when I look back on my family and I look back on the things that have happened to me, I don't feel any negative internal energy from it anymore. And that's the true type of healing that I'm talking about.
That is a really different way of looking at forgiveness. I think most people go, okay, well, I forgive you, but a lot of times we still carry that with us.
Precisely. It is. I mean, everything is energy, everything's energetic, everything takes root in our body. And, and it's sort of going back to the codependency conversation. We can love somebody from a codependent perspective, and we truly love them. But what we're really loving is they are meeting some of the needs that weren't met when we were children, or, however far we go back. When we honestly love from a place of wholeness, it is a completely different scenario. And that's forgiveness is the same way. I mean, like you said, we all have been trained in society to forgive those that have wronged us. I mean, whether it's within our church, within our families, forgiveness is the right thing to do. And it is the right thing to do, but it's not really the right thing to do for the reason most people think. It's because it impacts us on a very, very deep internal way. And what ends up happening when we don't release the forgiveness, everything that happens in the present is processed through the past. So you can see how the layering on continues to happen. It's why we have triggers with certain people, because we haven't released it.
That's such a big piece. And I really love how your book really blends your personal experience with spiritual insight. So, how did your spiritual journey influence your healing process?
It was tremendous. Again, I never set out on a path to, a spiritual path per se, although technically we were all on a spiritual path, whether we know it or not. But they kind of both went hand in hand. I realized that in order to heal to the extent that I was looking, I had to understand things in a more deeper way. I never had formal religion growing up. I joined the Catholic Church when I was in high school. Then I, gravitated to another church when my children were born. Always went to church, but never actually really felt connected to something greater than myself. And it was during the process of healing and looking back and seeing the patterns and understanding the bigger picture that I started feeling more connected myself to something greater than myself. And I really literally side by side, I started delving into the healing aspect of myself and the spiritual aspect of life in general. And that spiritual path for me has been one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. I mean, it's allowed me to see my husband's suicide from a completely different perspective. Number one, I see it as his choice. I wouldn't ever expect or want anyone to ever make that choice. I recognize it was his choice, though. I also see his death as, it transported my sons and I in a completely different trajectory. We are all three of us better humans because of it. I would never not want my husband back. However, I see how different our lives are because of his death, and my spiritual path helped me to see it differently. And, my kids and I are thriving. I mean, we're very, very happy. We are fully aware of what took place, but it doesn't have any hold on us at this point. We understand. I believe my husband is just in another place. I do believe that, our spirit is who we are. So everything really in the healing process evolved around my growing understanding of who we are as spiritual beings. And, When I look at relationships as an example, now I don't believe we can heal outside of relationships, whether it's a platonic relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship. We need mirrors. We need people to help us see who we are. And, from that perspective, my spirituality has allowed me to meet people in a completely different way. I see people as mirrors of myself. So when I see somebody, I admire their loving nature. Well, that's a reflection of me. When I see somebody who, gosh, they're so angry about that. Well, I take a step back and say, wow, well, maybe I'm angry about that too. You see how like the spirituality has really integrated into my life in such a huge way that everything that I see day to day has actually changed. My perspective has changed drastically.
In your book, you talk about rewriting your story. How did that shift happen for you, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So, really, the whole journey to heal was rewriting my story. I just hadn't called it that until I wrote the book. But yeah. So, what ended up happening was, as an example, I look back now and I see the different things that happened to me. I'll take my mother's, the event that happened when I was 7 years old. I recognize now. So I see that story. My mother tried to take her life. I walked in on it. I see that had actually nothing to do with me. It wasn't anything to do with little Tricia. I recognized that I believed at the time that I was stronger than everyone else because I could handle that. And I went through life, a majority of my life, believing that. I don't believe that at all anymore. We're all resilient. We just have to get to the place where we recognize that resiliency. No one has my back. I don't look at life from that perspective anymore. I feel very grounded. I feel very safe. I don't feel like I have to be all world. I feel like I can reach out for help. I don't feel like, who I am is dictated by what that event and what occurred. So what ends up happening is I'm rewriting the past, literally rewriting the past. And that's what rewriting our stories is about. And it's not that the event didn't take place. It's the fact that the stories have now changed. And that's where the energy is released. That's where we let it all go. We don't hold on to it anymore. And yeah, I still have in the back crevices of my brain what took place, but it just doesn't have any power anymore. It doesn't matter.
That's such a big piece, being able to get to that place of just being able to start from basically like ground zero and rebuild a life that's authentic.
Exactly. And it's the authenticity that is the most important. So, what I've really had a hard time recognizing in myself is when we are not being authentic, we are performing. Okay. Now, when I used that word on myself, it was a shock because I think most of us strive to be authentic and most of us believe that we are authentic. The problem is that we have created this image of who we were based on defense mechanisms because of the things that happened to us. And so that those defense mechanisms are actually who's out there meeting the world. And it's not the authentic self. And so that is in essence a performance. And, when we are out there performing, we are not actually ever seen. We are not actually ever met. And those are the two, I believe, two of the most fundamental needs that all humans have. And, when we're not being seen and we're not being met, there's always going to be a piece of us that feels empty. Always. And, that's why we're all out there chasing everything. I mean, we're chasing bigger houses, bigger cars. And I'm not opposed to material possessions. Don't get me wrong. I think we all entitled for whatever reason we need these things or want these things. But when that becomes our main focus to feel safe, to create an image of who we are, to show the world that we've arrived or whatever it happens to be, we're really just performing. Our authentic self doesn't need much, to be honest with you. And, I'm blessed. I'm blessed to have created a comfortable life. But at this point, the things that mean the most to me from an authentic perspective, simply a conversation with you or taking a walk with my kids or, just simple things. And that authenticity is the thing that makes our life joyful, that makes us content, even just sitting in the room, having a cup of coffee. without doing anything special. And, I know myself that I have strived my entire life and have tried to create much of who I was outside of myself. And now when I look at that and I see how empty it actually was and that I was just performing, um, I see how silly it was also, because it's our authentic self that is going to bring us that peace that we're looking for. And I think this is really, if I had to sum up my book and what was a book designed to show myself and anyone reading it, that we can have inner peace. That is our birthright, to have inner peace. And the way to have inner peace is to change those stories that are running behind the scene and find ourselves way back to our authentic self. And when we get there, it's a really, really joyful place to be.
Well, you're such an inspiration, Tricia. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about the stories we tell ourselves?
Okay, well, I have a website. So my website is a pathforhealing.com, for the number 4, pathforhealing.com. My Gmail is a pathforhealing@gmail. Yeah, please reach out. I love talking about this subject. My memoir isn't really meant to be inspiring as much as it is to be true. I believe it is true for all of us. We all have stories, and some of us have stories that might be, marginally smaller, some definitely bigger. But at the end of the day, even at the smallest stories, we release those stories, we become closer to be more authentic. And from a spiritual perspective, and this is where spirituality plays a big role for me. I believe we all are part of this cosmic whole, and each of us came here to be our authentic self. So when we're not being our authentic self, we don't fit into that massive puzzle that we're supposed to be fitting into. And the best way to create peace on earth, in my opinion, is actually to be our authentic selves.
Well, Tricia, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you, Tricia. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your book, The Stories We Tell Ourselves, the soul journey to uncovering the hidden scripts that define us. If you or anyone you know is having problems and is thinking about suicide, please call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988. You can call them from any phone, and again, that number is 988. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.